The meeting of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd. Present. Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Present. Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
Here.
Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
President Reed. You have 5 present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have
6.
6. We have several bills before the committee today. We'll first take up Board Bill 37, since we have our Public Safety Director here. Come forward.
Thank you all. Good morning.
Good morning.
I am here in support of Board Bill 37. Mr. Chair, thank you so very much for the opportunity to speak into this committee. I'm also here in opposition of Board Bill 5, which is Alderman Vaccaro, and I'll wait until he gets here. I've had extensive discussions with Alderman Vaccaro on yesterday, and I think we've come to an agreement with respect to how this matter should be addressed. With respect to Board Bill 37, Board Bill 37 is a mutual aid agreement between St. Clair County and the City of St. Louis. By way of background, there are 3 entities, governmental entities, that are responsible for the security on the Metrolink train. They are St. Louis County. St. Louis County has 44 officers assigned to the train. St. Clair County, Illinois, who has 14 officers, and the City of St. Louis with 8 to 9 officers at any given time. These are police officers. In addition to Metrolink's security guards, there are security guards that are hired by Metrolink, as well as contracted others that are contracted with Metrolink. The responsibility of all of these law enforcement personnel is to ensure the security of Metrolink from St. Louis County over to St. Clair County, covering about 48 miles of track. Unfortunately, we've not done a very good job of securing the Metrolink. And when things do occur that are criminal in nature, we tend to point fingers at each other. And I believe that to be the wrong way to secure the Metrolink track. What we're doing now is what I'm just simply asking to be codified. We, and I am demanding, that St. Louis County and St. Clair County officers board the Metrolink train and ride the Metrolink train for the entire course. And so if you have a security person that gets on the Metrolink train over in Belleville, Illinois, and rides it over to St. Louis City, and if a crime occurs in the city of St. Louis, then that St. Clair officer ought to be able to detain, with our knowledge, to be able to detain until a local police officer arrives. There are constraints by law and by constitution with respect to multi-jurisdictional responsibility. What that simply means is that a St. Clair, Illinois officer may not arrest per se in the state of Missouri. There are prohibitions with respect to that, but they ought to be able to detain. It's analogous to the major case squad understanding that these jurisdictions have. So what it will provide us with responsibility, accountability, and transparency is what I'm looking for from St. Louis County, from St. Louis County, as well as the city of St. Louis. We can no longer say, from a law enforcement perspective, that it was not my responsibility. We all have responsibility to secure the train. And so Board Bill 37 simply codifies what I would like to see done anyway. And that is, if you are in law enforcement and you observe a crime, you have the duty to act. You have a duty to act. Even if you can't arrest, your duty to act is to detain. And so all of the entities are on board with this. I have members from the transit folk here, from St. Clair here, and others that concur with the bill. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm prepared to answer any questions that you might have with respect to this matter.
Okay, then. We can take questions from members of the committee. First, would you excuse Alderman Kotar and Mohammed?
Noted.
We will begin questioning Alderman Jeffrey Boyd.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is, what about St. Louis County? There's not going to be an agreement with St. Louis County?
St. Louis County does not require an agreement in that it is a state of Missouri law enforcement entity.
Okay.
And it may arrest in the city of St. Louis, notwithstanding any agreement, so that's not an issue.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I didn't know that. Let me ask you this on that point, though. So could North County Collaborative make an arrest in St. Louis City?
Yes.
Okay.
By law, those officers may, yes.
Because I was told that they couldn't some years ago, so that's good information. Thank you for that. Now, you said they can only detain, right?
Yes.
So walk me through the scenario of what would happen if they found somebody on the MetroLink that didn't have a ticket.
Well, I expect, we don't want to arrest folk without tickets.
Or fighting. Let's say it's an assault.
Let's say it's an assault or someone with a weapon.
Okay.
On the MetroLink. What I would expect the St. Clair officer to do is to detain that person, call for assistance from a City of St. Louis police officer or St. Louis County officer, whoever happens to be on board, and to turn that person over. Because the probable cause statement would have to be made by a St. Louis City officer or a St. Louis County officer in order to prosecute.
So are they on the same frequency, all the same?
We are, they have not been on the same frequency, much to my chagrin. I expect to have that resolved on Monday.
Okay. And the other question may just be a technical question. I'm looking at Section 3. We're talking about the mayor or the police commissioner shall be authorized to enter into a mutual aid agreement. It has been my understanding, typically, if there was an agreement to be made within the public safety department, that the public safety director would sign off on the agreement, not at the department level.
Well, I can certainly do that. That's a technicality. Didn't know quite how to address that.
Yeah.
And would certainly welcome your suggestion.
Well, I was just wondering, because I don't know all the charter, provisions, so I was just asking out of curiosity. I mean, is it the public safety director that would actually sign off on the contract, or is there leeway for, building commissioner can enter into a contract with somebody if they wanted to?
There's certainly that, this is a bill that I did ask the city council to take a look at, and in its wisdom, it thought that it would be best signed by either the mayor or the police chief, but I certainly don't have a problem.
I mean, not that
with
you
taking
wouldn't
the
know about it,
responsibility.
but I would just think to me, I would probably prefer to have the accountability at the director level than at the commissioner level.
And I'm certainly willing to accept responsibility for that.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman.
Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Cone.
So typically, we're not doing a board bill when it's a contractual situation or a understanding. But the reason that this is a board bill is because we're authorizing counties outside of the state of Missouri with powers of arrest or citation. Is that why this is a board bill versus?
It's unfortunately, they will never have powers of arrest because of the federal laws in terms of the difference in jurisdictions. So it's an interstate matter. We have an interstate train yet we're acknowledging the fact that it's okay for them to be in our city, it's okay for them to be on our train, and so we're acknowledging the fact that they will detain.
So, there is an agreement in place, that, like, an actual contractual agreement in place?
No. There is not, and that's the reason that I wanted this memorandum of understanding, so that we do understand that if a St. Louis City police officer, and vice versa, and I expect St. Clair County to provide a similar agreement, that when our officers are in Illinois, that they will, if they're on a train and they happen to be investigating something, and they're in Illinois, they will also detain.
Okay, so, I mean, the city of St. Louis doesn't have the power to compel Madison County, St. Clair County to police the metro trains. So this board bill is not compelling them to do so. It's simply stating that when they are patrolling the metro, that our police officers will respond to a call that they may place.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.
Alderwoman Hubbard? No question. Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Judge Edwards, for being here today and for addressing this. So if I understand correctly, this is a mutual aid agreement according to Section 3,
Yes.
which would go both ways, essentially, as Alderman from the 25th was saying. St. Clair County, or excuse me, St. Louis City officers would then have the same authority in St. Clair County.
Yes.
Does this apply to St. Louis County officers? Are they going to be traveling the entire length of the metro length?
I do expect St. Louis County to travel the entire 48 miles of the track. It will apply, it's not necessary for the city of St. Louis to enter into a deal with St. Louis County, because we are both under the same statutes in terms of arrest. The issue with St. Clair County is that it is a different jurisdiction, a different state.
Sure.
And so what I am trying to ensure here is that St. Clair County is as accountable in the city of St. Louis as it would be in Illinois, and vice versa. My concern has been, quite frankly, is that each of these entities, including the city of St. Louis, have been under the belief that their responsibility for addressing crime stops at its borders, and it doesn't. Crime is a regional problem. And so if you come out of the St. Louis County and you pass Skinker, east of Skinker, St. Louis County, you still have responsibility for what you have observed on the train.
But, and so to the Alderman from the 25th point, this is not compelling a St. Clair County officer to stay on the train once it goes over the river. What would compel the officers from St. Clair County to enter St. Louis City and continue to ensure safety on the trains past their own jurisdiction?
Well, I don't think that this particular bill will do that. Certainly, St. Clair County is paid a lot of money by Bi-State, and that it ought to have some responsibility on the entire track. And that's the issue that I'm trying to address on two fronts. So this is, I'm dealing with the legal issue now with respect to the ability to detain. With Bi-State, St. Louis City, St. Louis County, St. Clair County, on the executive side, there should be some responsibility of St. Clair County and its officers to do its job. That's part of the contractual responsibility that it would have with Bi-State.
So you mentioned that St. Clair County is paid a significant amount from Metrolink. Who's paying for the officers, the 44 officers in St. Louis County, the 14 officers in St. Clair, and then 8 to 9 officers in St. Louis City? Metrolink pays those 3 police departments to keep those officers on, and they pay for those entirely, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. When a crime occurs on the Metrolink in St. Louis City, who is accountable for that crime? Who is responsible for ensuring the safety of the trains in St. Louis City? Is it Metro, Bi-State, or is it St. Louis City Police Department?
It's ultimately the St. Louis City Police Department, because Bi-State security officers are not police. So they would have to turn that individual over to St. Louis Police, and it's the St. Louis Police Department that completes the probable cause affidavit, turns that over to the circuit attorney, and the circuit attorney then makes a decision as to whether she wishes to prosecute or not prosecute. So what this bill is simply doing is codifying what we are already doing.
Right. So when a crime occurs on a Metrolink station in St. Louis County, who is ultimately responsible for ensuring the safety on the train platforms in St. Louis County?
St. Louis County.
St. Louis County Police Department. It's not Metro Bi-State, it is St. Louis County Police Department.
Metrolink, Bi-State, or security officers, if you think of them.
Who
only
is
as-
ultimately responsible for ensuring the safety on the trains themselves? Is it the 3 different police departments, or is it Metro Bi-State?
It's all of the law enforcement entities collectively.
But it's not, Metro Bi-State is not a police department, is not a public safety department, right?
It is a public safety department.
State statute.
So I'm just trying to understand ultimately who is responsible for ensuring the safety on our trains and on the platforms.
Collectively, all of the entities have entered into an agreement to be responsible. Ultimately.
And the 3, and the entities are St. Louis County Police, St. Louis City Police, St. Clair County,
And Metrolink.
and Metro Bi. The
And
problem,
Metrolink's contracted security officers.
the problem I see with this is that there are so many cooks in this kitchen that when something occurs, we all point our fingers at every other entity. And at the end of the day, there is no overall responsible entity that has the responsibility of ensuring safety on our trains and on our platforms. And when we have so many responsible entities, it's very easy to point the finger at the other entity and not take responsibility. And that is why we continue to have public safety issues on our trains and platforms, as far as I see it.
Wait, let me address that, please. I believe the way this will be corrected is that there will be specific responsibility. For example, the grand platform. City of St. Louis takes responsibility for the grand platform, then the City of St. Louis is responsible for that platform. But if Metrolink, for example, has a security contracted service entity, Securitas, up there, it's Securitas' responsibility to police the area.
But
But
does
ultimately-
Securitas have arresting capabilities? So how would they police without arresting abilities?
And that's the opportunity for them to detain. You know, we have security officers with weapons that have the responsibility to police that particular area. When you walk into this building, we have security officers in that area. They have the responsibility to secure that area as you walk into this building. Do they have the right to file a probable cause statement and take it to the circuit attorney's office and get it issued? Maybe not, but they are witnesses. They become witnesses. And so what we're trying simply to do, and what I hope to do, is make everybody accountable. It's a collective responsibility. And so for too long, we have pointed fingers at each other with respect to the Metrolink train. But ultimately, if it happens in St. Louis County, it's St. Louis County's problem. If it happens in the city of St. Louis, by default, it's St. Louis City's problem. If it happens in Illinois, by default, it's Illinois' problem.
So let's go back to that, the Grand Station. You mentioned if there's an incident, it could either be the responsibility of Securitas for securing that Metrolink station or the St. Louis City Police. Therein lies the problem in my mind, where you have a bifurcated responsibility. Either it's Securitas or it's St. Louis City Police. When you have two responsible parties, unless you have a timetable that describes when Securitas is responsible and when St. Louis City Police is responsible, there's no real accountability for who is providing the public safety at that South Grand stop at any given time.
Yeah, maybe let me see if I can clarify this for you, Alderman, and I've tried a couple of ways. Let me do it this way. An incident occurred at the Grand Station, and Metrolink had a security officer there that was contracted through Securitas. That person was supposed to be on the platform. When that person is on the platform, then there's not a need to have St. Louis City on that platform, St. Louis County on the platform, or St. Clair County on the platform. So at 8:30, when I'm supposed to go to lunch, I leave the platform. And 6 minutes later, an assault occurs. So the question becomes, who's responsible in your mind? I guess that's what you're raising. So ultimately, I'm saying that Securitas should have been there. Metrolink should have had somebody covering. But when that person is caught, and that person was indeed caught, that person then is turned over to St. Louis City Police, who then has the responsibility of processing the individual. And so when we start talking about responsibility, we're talking about responsibility, and I'm saying collective responsibility, but there's a process.
So are the schedules of Securitas and St. Louis City police officers and that goes for St. Louis County police officers too, are they shared with each other so that we have an open communication about when St. Louis City police officers will be on a platform or a train, St. Louis County officers will be on a platform or train, and when Metro Bi-State is responsible for providing the security on those? Because it's my understanding that that communication has failed and that those scheduling have not been shared, and therefore the responsibility becomes very nebulous.
Well, I would push back on that a little bit. The schedules are shared. So the schedules are shared. However, there are some other things that are not shared. For example, a common radio frequency, or perhaps camera footage. Those are things that I have to address to try to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of that. But the schedules are indeed shared.
Okay, that's very helpful, and I think that's something that is contrary to what we've read in the papers, and I'm glad to hear that we're sharing those. And I apologize for taking so long. I think that the security on a Metrolink and our buses is one of the most pressing issues that our city and region is facing, because when we have residents who are afraid to get on public transit to get to work on a regular basis, we have visitors who are unwilling to take our public transit after having taken it from the airport to downtown. This is inhibiting our economic growth and our ability for our residents to get to their jobs. So I appreciate the time here. I wanted to, if we could really quickly, we know that Metro is paying for our officers. St. Louis City has more stops, I believe, than St. Clair County, am I right?
Yes.
More mileage.
Yes.
And St. Louis City has equal to, if not more, stops or mileage than St. Louis County, am I right?
I'm not sure about that.
I see it.
The answer is no.
Not mileage.
Mileage stops. Well, what I'm seeing is we have 44 officers in St. Louis County, 14 in St. Clair County, but only 8 in the city of St. Louis. Can you help me understand? We have more crime in the city of St. Louis. We have more ridership in the city of St. Louis. why is it that we would only have 8 to 9 officers in the most densely populated part of the region?
Yeah. I would disagree with respect to ridership in the city of St. Louis. We may have ridership where the end destination might be in the city of St. Louis, but we have more ridership from the students at Washington University and probably than any other area collectively. We only have, we have a limited amount of officers in the city of St. Louis because we just simply don't have the people to take on the responsibility. I have taken on the responsibility to try to address this issue, not because we are indeed the main contractee with Metrolink. We've taken on this responsibility not because we are the focus of Metrolink. We're taking on this responsibility because whenever anything happens on the Metrolink train, it tends to be pointed toward the city of St. Louis. And it probably shouldn't be. Maybe I shouldn't be the person that's taking the lead on this, but I am. And so my interest is to make sure that the entire train line is safe. If it means that we drive it from the city of St. Louis, then so be it. But we have the least amount of officers that are assigned to the Metrolink, but we have the most to lose. And it's the reason that I've decided that it is important that we take the lead with respect to this matter.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I appreciate you saying that. What I'd like to see is a situation in which the St. Louis City Police Department holds responsibility for the safety and security of its passengers in St. Louis City on the platforms and the trains, and directs Metro Bi-State when they need to fill in any way. But the buck stops somewhere. And if the buck can stop with St. Louis City Police Department within the city limits, if the buck can stop with St. Louis County Police Department within the county limits, and if the buck can stop in St. Clair County Police Department in Illinois side, I think at least then we will at least have somewhere to hold that responsibility. Metro Bi-State does not have arresting authority. I think to give them that responsibility is doing a disservice to our police department, who does have arresting authority and who does have the public safety of the entire city under its responsibility. So I'm really encouraged and grateful to hear you say that you are taking the lead here as the director of the St. Louis City Police Department. I would like to see additional police officers in the St. Louis City side, whether that looks like bringing in St. Clair County to fill in or some other way, but I do think having a lower number of public safety officers with arresting capacity within St. Louis City, where we do have a high ridership and we do have a lot of mileage and we do have a lot of stops, really does a disservice to the public safety of the passengers while they're in the city of St. Louis. And we do know anecdotally that people do feel the difference riding on the trains when they enter the city limits, and that's a real shame. I'd like to see that addressed, and I'm glad to hear that the buck stops with you, Judge.
Thank you very much, Alderman.
That's all the questions I have.
Would you want to hear from Bi-State on what their overall security plans are, or from Metrolink?
Sure.
Bring them in if you so wish.
I do see Mr. Franklin here, but from Bi-State, but I don't know.
Not necessarily at this point, but
Sure.
at another time, we could bring them in and have a specific conversation
Well,
around what they're planning.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I would like this bill voted out today if possible. And the reason for that is that I have a meeting with Metrolink where I am making very strong demands and consistent with what the Alderwoman has raised. And I recognize what she has stated, and I respect what she said, and I agree with what she said with respect to responsibility. And so in order for me to ensure and make the appropriate demands to the appropriate entities, I just would like to have this bill voted out so that they understand that we're serious, precisely and very succinctly, very serious about this issue.
Yeah, that did not mean not voting the bill out today, just
Thank you.
simply for informational purposes so we can really get some of the other questions answered and get some other direction on
I
it.
do think that would be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Alderwoman Boyd?
Well, I think, Judge Edwards, you had kind of start answering one of my questions, because I was asking, had you met with all the entities to clarify the roles and responsibilities of each entity that's involved in this whole process? And so you already said that you were supposed to meet with them. And I think what I kept hearing Alderwoman Spencer keep emphasizing was we had less police. So is there any way in the future that we're looking at, the near future, to increase that number? Or is it a way that they're recruiting police to add that number? Or is it a number you have in mind that you want to bring to them?
I think that the problem here with respect to the number of officers that we have assigned to MetroLink is that we are maxed out. We are 130 officers down in the city of St. Louis. And so what we try to do is we try to make sure that we have a sufficient amount of officers to address the areas in the city of St. Louis. And so we are dependent. We are certainly dependent upon the MetroLink security officers. We're dependent upon Securitas. We're dependent upon St. Clair County. We're certainly dependent upon St. Louis County. And so we have allotted the officers to MetroLink based upon the number of officers that we have available. Should we have, or if we are lucky enough to increase the number of officers in the department, then I suspect that the number of officers will go up with the MetroLink agreement.
So do you have a number in mind? What do you think will be comparable to that or to match what the other entities have brought to the table?
You know, I don't at this point. We're working with what we have, and we've asked St. Louis County to do more, and it has. We've asked St. Clair County to do more, and it has. And so I think that we have a sufficient amount of folk on the line that we ought to be able to keep MetroLink safe.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions of members of the committee? Alderman Cole?
More so a statement than a question, Judge. It pains me, whenever I see a friend of mine post on social media about their, experience, riding the metro. And it happens quite regularly, actually, whether it's the bus or the, metro train, the MetroLink. And, on MetroLink in particular, I've had stories of people, being beat up, which obviously is not acceptable. And I think to my colleague from the 20th Ward's point, that there seems to be a noticeable increase in activity, once you kind of cross into the city's area of responsibility. I'll support this, obviously, because I think it's important that we are working across jurisdictions to, support ridership and public transit and whatnot. And I applaud you for, taking the lead on that with regard to the city. I will say, with Metro in particular, we did have a situation a number of years ago with trash collection and Metro at, various bus stops in the city. And one of the tools in our toolbox is that every year we do an annual appropriation over to Metro. So as you go into your discussions with them, just remember that they still receive money directly from the city of St. Louis. And we actually had held up their appropriations funding several times to address the issue of trash. And I think security is paramount, and I think that that's a worthy discussion as well. And if you need the help of this board with regard to negotiations, I think that we would be willing to entertain that. I think it actually got to the point with the refuse that we separately allocated $500,000 for the trash services, trash collection with Metro. So I want to allow you to have that tool in your toolbox.
I appreciate that.
And so, this is obviously something that's very important to the city and to our citizens and to the riders of public transit. So, thank you for the work that you're doing, and if we can be of further help, let us know.
Well, thank you very much. And I will add that I'm having a conversation about something that I experienced. I took off my suit and put on a pair of jeans and a ball cap, and I rode the entire MetroLink track. And so just to experience the security, just to see what the platforms look like, just to see whether folk were getting on and checking tickets. So all of the things that I've learned about MetroLink has brought me to this point of saying we can do better, and we will do better.
Alderwoman Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things that I heard, and I want to make sure I heard it right, because I have had Metro come in and explain some of the things some months ago when we had some overall concerns when the crime was rising. The security company that is monitoring our trains, they do carry guns. Is that true?
That is true. I know that the Metro officers, Securitas, also are armed with weapons, yes.
Absolutely. Okay. And so even though our number of officers may be limited, they can definitely detain.
Yes.
And then the officers can come in and arrest. We also have the ability for our officers to be more accessible faster to make those arrests and/or assist, because so many of our stops are in the direct patrol route throughout the city. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I think that the flaw, if you will,
Okay.
is the fact that the officers are not on the same radio frequency. And that's something that we're
Oh,
going
we
to
can
have,
do that.
we're going to have to fix. And I think that's a
Yeah.
relatively easy fix.
Yeah.
Another flaw has been we have not sufficiently shared data, particularly camera images. That's another thing that I think that we have to fix. Let me just say this. I think that law enforcement, by and large, does a good job. I think that there are some things that we can fix to ensure that safety is much better.
Okay.
I'm not sure, I would not go out on a limb and say we're going to eliminate every pickpocketer, or we're going to eliminate every purse snatching or things of that sort. But we can certainly be visible. Optics are important in terms of deterring crime. And so we have to make sure that we're present. And if we're present, then I think we have the ability to deter. We have the ability to stem the offenses that are occurring on the train. This will give us an opportunity to do that.
I like that. So those are things that we can definitely look at for the immediate future, being that we already have the real crime set up and we can share with the Metro. The other thing I wanted to ask you too is, because we've had St. Clair County and St. Louis County step up greatly, and we appreciate it, that also gives us more arresting power, and most especially from St. Louis County, because they already had it anyway.
Yes.
But now that we're making a move to even give us more power to take care of things in a most immediate way. And so, am I hearing that right?
Yes, just as Alderwoman Spencer indicated, this is about accountability.
Right.
And
Okay.
so we need to be accountable, and we have to stop pointing fingers.
Right.
And so this is really all about St. Louis County's accountability, St. Louis City's accountability, St. Clair County's accountability, MetroLink's accountability, Securitas accountability, and anybody else that has the responsibility on that train, whether it's the train conductor or whether it's the ticket taker. Everybody has to be responsible
And honestly
for that
speaking,
train.
also the riders.
Yes.
If you see something taking place, don't wait until it's dramatic. 911 is the call to make.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate everybody's stepping up to the plate, because in the past, the finger was always only pointed to St. Louis City. And so this is good that you have the cooperation going on, and we expect to see even more. But as the alderman from the 25th said, we have a lot of opportunity to give some additional help. And I think that that's what we have to look at, whether it's writing more grants, whatever needs to happen. But most people do feel safe on our, I noticed that the ridership went up, so it's not like it's declined. And we also know that if we all have the ability to talk about those things that are taking place and talk about them instead of always being negative about everything, everybody else will also step up and be more responsible. And that's with anything that we do. But I thank you for your leadership, and I want to thank Metro for getting on top of this and bringing everybody together.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Alderman Boyd, you had a
Yes,
amendment?
thank you. Judge, who was the city council that worked on this?
I don't know the young lawyer, but my conversations are generally with Judge Bush.
Okay. The only reason I asked that, and I do want to offer an amendment, so if the clerk can pass the amendments out. An agreement and a contract, I'm wondering if they are different. Because it's my understanding that ENA approves all contracts that the city engage in with other entities.
Yeah, this would be just a memorandum of understanding, which is
Okay.
much different from a contract. The consideration factor, the quid pro quo factor, this is just a memorandum of
that makes
understanding,
sense.
which will not require the comptroller to be involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And the president.
And the president. And I have no objection to police commissioner being substituted as director of public safety.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer, or ask for adoption of amendment number 1 to Board Bill 37. And it reads, to amend Board Bill page 2, line 10 to page 2, line 10 as follows. Beginning on page 2, line 10, strike out the words police commissioner and insert in lieu thereof to read in the words and figures as follows, director of public safety. So basically it strikes out police commissioner and inserts director of public safety.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt amendment number 1. Any discussion on the motion? If not, Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Boyd?
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro? Aye. Alderman Cone?
Aye.
Alderman Arnowitz? Alderwoman Hubbard? Aye. Alderman Kotar? Alderwoman Spencer?
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad? Alderwoman Boyd?
Aye.
Chairman Kennedy?
Aye.
President Reed? You have 7 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
By your vote, we've adopted amendment number 1. If there's no other discussion on the bill, we can take a,
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 37 as amended out with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
been moved and seconded that we adopt
Previous roll.
Board Bill number 37 as amended. There's been a request for previous roll. Is there any opposition to previous roll? Seeing none, by your vote, we have adopted Board Bill number 37 with a due pass recommendation as amended.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Chairman and committee members. Mr. Chairman, would you like for me to address at this time Board Bill 5, which is Alderman Vaccaro bill? It addresses the Detention Facility Advisory Commission.
Not at this point. We first have to have the alderman come up and present his bill. You know, we have let me take this one first. We have a very short bill from Samuel Moore dealing with a liquor moratorium. He's unable to be here today.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 27 out with a due pass recommendation.
Been moved,
Previous roll.
been moved and seconded that we adopt Board Bill 27 with a due pass recommendation. There's been a request for previous roll. Is there any opposition to previous roll? Seeing none, by your vote, we've adopted Board Bill 27 with a due pass recommendation. We'll now take up Board Bill number 5. Alderman?
Within Board Bill number 5 talks about putting a committee together. At some point, we need to start looking into how we're going to deal with the prison and the people there. It's not prison, it's a jail, even though we might treat it as a prison. I did talk to Jimmy Edwards and said I would hold this because he wanted to work a little bit more on the, what that committee would be made up of. I'm going to let him speak to what he believes. But I guess what I would like is, my thoughts are obviously to be a committee, whether it's a committee made up of a subcommittee of this committee or how we do it. I do think we need to start looking into it. The public safety director has his thoughts, which maybe his thoughts are good, but he feels that he should be the committee and the backup. So I thought what we could do is let him talk on his and then come back at a later time as we all look at this to decide which direction we want to take. As long as we're moving in a direction that makes sense. I'm open to questions if you.
Now, if we could have him come forward and he could speak. We're going to hold the bill,
We're going to hold the bill, but this way everybody has a
but
chance
since he is
to.
here, let's have him say a few words on it.
Thank you very much, Alderman Vaccaro, and thank you certainly for your courtesies on yesterday. With respect to Board Bill 5, I asked Alderman Vaccaro if he would hold the bill because of a couple of reasons. He's obviously very interested in transparency and accountability inside of the city's jails, particularly the medium security institution. I certainly have no problem with that. Currently, we have a two-step process. We have a grievance process to a grievance committee inside of the jail, as well as an appeals process to the commissioner. And so Alderman Vaccaro has talked about further transparency. I certainly have no problem with that. I have no problems with accountability. We just have to determine what is the next appeal step should be with respect to this matter, and I'm willing to have further discussion and would like to have further discussion with the alderman concerning this matter.
Did you have something, President? Because we're holding it. Okay. All right, then. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we're holding Board Bill 5 as well as Board Bill 32, correct? We're holding your bill as well. Okay, then. Then that takes care of our agenda today. With that, our meeting is adjourned.